we can start. Okay. All right, so before I move on, I would like to find out if my voice is audible enough. So can you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's good. In our last class, we were discussing the differences between different types of discourses or passages. We also saw different types of disagreements. Now today we are going to look at the differences between the normative and empirical. Now when you talk about the normative, you are somehow talking about the shoulds and shouldn'ts, what should or should not be done, or what ought to be or ought not. But when you're talking about the empirical, you're talking about what is or is not. So in this session, we will round up our analysis of the differences between values and facts. So values are related to what should or should not be. Facts are about what is or what is not. So the values are about the normative and facts are about the empirical. Now, sometimes we mistake values for facts. And in fact, there are factual statements with implicit value judgments. Now, let's look at these examples. Now, look at the difference between the two statements. The president has lifted the lockdown, and then the president has rightly lifted the lockdown. Now, you notice that the difference between the two is that the word rightly has been inserted in the second. So the first is a factual statement, and the second is like the first one with an implicit value judgment represented by the word rightly. So the second is, therefore a value judgment. And so the lesson is that we should look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. Without confirming those two kinds of meanings, you could be misled. So you can see how important such a distinction is to our business of thinking critically. Now, so that's one thing we need to note about the difference between values and facts. As a critical thinker, you need to pay attention to spotting when a statement is being on the empirical side or when a statement is being on the normative side, because the two of them, the differences between the two has implications. One is about what is, one is about what ought to be. Now, the next thing is to look at expressions that should not be interpreted literally. Now, in the business of logical reasoning, accuracy is very important, including the accuracy in meaning. When we are reasoning with statements, we would want to be accurate about the literal meaning of those statements. So statements that don't really have accurate literal meanings would not be very easy to work with in logical reasoning. So, and that includes statements that should not be interpreted literally, And that's why we are talking about metaphors and proverbs. Once a statement is not to be interpreted literally, then it's not very relevant to logical reasoning because there's no accuracy in meaning. Now, let's look at both metaphors and proverbs. Metaphors are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Examples: don't judge a book by its cover. It usually means don't evaluate things by just looking at their appearances. And then the second one is raining cats and dogs. So it means it's raining heavily. Of course, you know that cats and dogs can't fall from the sky. So that's why we say such statements are not to be interpreted literally. Then we have proverb. proverb is a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. So proverbs have both literal and non-literal meanings. And the non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. So that means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. Examples. Only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of his feet. Now, that has a literal meaning, and the literal meaning is correct. You don't actually test the depth of a river with two of your feet. Then it also has a non-literal meaning, which is that you don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. You know. It takes a whole village to raise a child, which of course is true, it's literally true. And then a non-literal meaning is that the community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child, which is true whether it's a village or it's an urban setting and all that. Then no one can lick his or her own elbow, which is literally true. You can't lick your own elbow unless you have a very unusual or special kind of skill. And then the non-literal meaning is that no person is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. Now, the intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are mostly used to advise people, but proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, the proverb, no one can lick his own elbow, can be used to encourage corruption or convince one that it's impossible to fight corruption. Now, a little exercise. Provide an example each of a metaphor and a proverb. So that's something you can do at your spare time. How is a metaphor different from a proverb? Now, the difference between a metaphor and a proverb is that metaphor is a statement that we should not interpret literally. But a proverb has both a literal and a non-literal interpretation. So the difference between a metaphor and a proverb is that a proverb has both literal and non-literal interpretations. Now let's look at meaning defects in language. You see, now we've seen some statements or expressions that are not always interpreted literally. Another problem with accuracy in literal meaning is with some problems called problems such as vagueness and ambiguity. Now, these are two problems that need to be handled before you can even reason logically about the statement. So if you are reading a passage and you intend to apply logical reasoning to that passage, you first of all have to see if the passage is free from vagueness and ambiguity. So let's look at both of them. Vagueness is an expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. When a meaning of something has no boundaries of application. So an expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. Examples. He'll be here any moment from now. He'll be here any moment from now. So the phrase any moment from now has no boundary of application. I mean, it's just any moment from now until thy kingdom comes. So you really don't know when to expect his coming. I will come to see your parents at the right time. So at the right time also has no boundary of application. That car is expensive. Now, expensive only tells us that something is not easy to buy. But how expensive? What is the range? Is it 100,000 cedis, $100,000, or 100,000, or $1 million or whatever? You wouldn't know. What it just tells you is that it's expensive. So expensive is vague because it has no boundary of application. Then you have ambiguity. Now a sentence is ambiguous when it's capable of more than one meaning. Now, so this is different from ambiguity. Ambiguity means that something is not precise. It has no boundary of application. But ambiguity means that something has more than one meaning. Now, there are three kinds of ambiguity. So I'm taking this one from elsewhere so that I'll show you how to easily identify ambiguities. Now, first of all, you have lexical ambiguity, which is ambiguity that occurs in a single word. So this type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have the same spelling but different meanings. Such words are called homographs. Now, examples: he lives close to the bank. Now, the question is, does he live close to a river bank or a bank as a financial institution? So the word bank is it has different meanings. Military head, 6 arms. Military head, 6 arms. So are we talking about the biological head of a military man or the head of the military as an institution? Now, are we also talking about the biological arms of a military man, or are we talking about weapons? Now, other homographs include race, chest, light, and so on. Now, referential ambiguity. This type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two or more properties of things in a sentence. Now, referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns. Now, so some pronouns could be ambiguous. For instance, the boy told his father about a theft case, and he was very upset. Now, the question is, who is upset, the boy or the father? So the pronoun he does not specify which of the nouns in the sentence is referring to. Now, he used deceit to sell the soup to me, but I did not buy it. Now, the question is, what did I not buy, the deceit or the soup? So here too, the pronoun it fails to specify which noun it's referring to. Okay. Syntactic or sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. No, syntactic or sentential ambiguity occurs when it's clear what the individual words in the sentence mean, but it's not clear what the whole sentence means. So the individual words could be clear and precise in their meanings, but the way the words were put together to form a sentence makes it ambiguous. For examples, today we should be discussing violence on TV. Today we should be discussing violence on TV. So, is it that discussion on violence will be held on a TV program, or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? So, there are two competing meanings, two or more competent meanings, or competing meanings. Now, the dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Now, is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room, or is cheating the topic of the lecture she's going to deliver in the seminar room? So these are ambiguous sentences. That's what we call sentential ambiguity. Now, the difference between vagueness and ambiguity: a vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying the meaning of the term. On the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning, leaving us confused as to which of the meanings particularly is intended. So vagueness means no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one accepted meaning. So you can see that's the difference. The role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. Now, vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. Now, the role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. So that's some of the roles they can play. Now, equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. Now, this is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. Equivocation is to take advantage of ambiguity, because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. Now, there are two kinds of equivocation. We have non-argumentative equivocation, and then we have the argumentative one. Now, we're going to see examples of argumentative equivocation when we see arguments in the last week of the semester, especially when we see informal fallacies. But today we're going to look at examples of non-argumentative equivocation. Now let's look at some of them. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Now the first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. So, time flies like an arrow. And then the second flies is a noun indicating fruit insects. So fruit flies is actually a type of insect. Now the first like is used for the purpose of comparison. So time flies like an arrow. So it tells you that time flies as fast as an arrow flies. And then the second like is used in a different way as a verb indicating a preference for something. And so it's used as a verb. And so fruit flies like a banana. So the fruit flies like a banana, or you can, in the sense of fruit flies preferring a banana or something. So you can see that equivocation occurs with two words in that sentence. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. So the first use of gay means happiness, and then the second means the state of being homosexual. Okay, so these are instances of equivocation. You can see one word occurring twice or more in a passage, and it's not just that one word is occurring twice or more, but that it's occurring with more than one meaning. So that's equivocation. Strategy for identifying equivocation. Now, it's good to learn to identify equivocation in a passage. Now, so what's the strategy? First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage, whether it's been used more than once. Then, if you find that a word has been used more than once, then you proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. See if it has different meanings. If you're able to make these two observations, then the sentence or the passage contains equivocation. Importance of identifying equivocation. Now note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in an argument, their meaning tends to be clarified before we can proceed, or rather their meaning needs to be clarified before we can proceed to evaluate the argument. So like I was saying, that these problems would not really allow you to reason about the passage. You have to attend to them first, clarify them before you can even make use of a sentence or a passage in logical reasoning. Now, a little exercise. Determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. So, which of these is vague and which is ambiguous? Number one, we should raise tax on the rich. We should raise tax on the rich. So, can anyone tell us whether it is vague or ambiguous? So, if you want to answer that, you can raise your hand, and then when I tell you to go ahead, then you can unmute your mic so that your voice could be heard. So, we should raise tax on the rich. Is it vague or is it ambiguous? Okay, so how many are we now? We are 39. We have 39 attendees. Okay, so when you say we should raise tax on the rich, it's vague because the word rich has no boundary of application. When you talk about raising tax on the rich, who are the rich? From what amount of money do we say that someone is rich? So there's really no boundary of application. So you can say it's vague. I'll be back later. Now, later is vague because later doesn't tell you any particular time. So it's vague. I'm renting a new apartment. Now, when you say I'm renting a new apartment, it's not clear whether I am renting it from someone or I'm renting it to someone. So it has two meanings, two possible meanings. And both of the meanings are legitimate meanings. So that means it's ambiguous. Stolen jewel found by tree. Now, it's not clear whether it was found beside a tree or that it is actually the tree that found it. So that makes it ambiguous. Democracy is freedom for all. Now, when you say democracy is freedom for all, the all is not specific. It doesn't refer. If it was all persons, then we'll know it applies to human beings. But it didn't say all persons. It just said all, which logically includes human beings and all kinds of animals. Two vehicles collide, one died. Two vehicles collide, one died. And so when you look at that, you see that it didn't specify what died. If it is one person died, then we know it is a human being. But it didn't say one person, it just said one. So that suffers the same problem as democracy is freedom for all. Then court tries shooting defendant. Court tries shooting defendant. Now, when you look at that, you ask yourself, what gives you the confusion? What confuses you in that statement? Court tries shooting defendant. So you see that it has two meanings, two legitimate meanings. One, it could mean that the court is trying to shoot a defendant, or that the court is trying a defendant in a shooting case. Okay. So this wraps it up regarding meaning defects in language. And we saw two kinds of meaning defects: vagueness and ambiguity. And now we've seen how ambiguity could be used in the sense of equivocation. Now let's look at some senses of law. Now, when you talk about law, the word law is too broad. It encompasses too many things, as we shall soon find out. So there's no definition of law because you have to specify what kind of law you're talking about before you can even define it. So we have 7 senses of law. We have natural law, civil law, cultural law, customary law, moral, logical, mathematical, and divine law. Now let's look at them one by one. Now we have natural laws, which are also called scientific laws. Now these refer to statements that describe the regularity or uniformity in the patterns of events or properties of things in the world. Now we form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, then that's a natural or scientific law. So natural law, also called scientific law, is a law we have formed by observing some regularity or uniformity in nature. Other examples of natural law: planets revolve around the sun, the atomic weight of gold is 12, animals survive on oxygen, anything that has weight falls to the ground if suspended in the air. Okay. Then we have civil or statutory laws. And these are laws made by man, or you can call them man-made laws to regulate human behavior. So they are usually legal instruments accompanied by sanction and backed by force. Examples: we have commercial law, tax law, criminal, corporate, constitutional, traffic, and human rights law, and so on. They must be obeyed by all citizens, and they are usually accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. Now, cultural norms or social conventions or social rules. Now, these are common understandings about how we should do certain things whether in traditional societies, in the case of cultural norms, or in modern societies, in the case of social conventions, and in any society, group, organization, or institution, in the case of social rules. Now, disobedience is not normally punishable, but it attracts social disapproval. And also because we're not talking about laws, we're just talking about common understandings. So when you go against those common understandings, well, you wouldn't be punished in a definite way, but at least you would meet with some disapproval. Examples include how we should dress, speak, receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions, and so on. Okay. Then we have customary law. When a cultural norm becomes a civil law, sometimes the government can decide to convert some customary duties or laws in the rural area and make it a law so that disobedience could be punishable. So we have customary courts in rural areas. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law include the powers of a chief and then traditional marriage rights and duties. These could be transformed into customary law so that those who go against them could be punished. Then we have moral law. Now, there's no universally accepted definition of moral law, but moral laws are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. Usually, for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. And also, any principle that is not universally recognized cannot be a moral law. So it's only those that every human being acknowledges is a principle we should observe. That's what we call a moral law. Example, do not steal. Now everyone agrees, anywhere at all, anywhere in the world agrees that stealing is not good. Do not kill. Do not discriminate. Do not take another person's spouse. So these are, somehow universally accepted. Logical law. These are rules for reasoning. Now, the most common examples are deductive and inductive reasoning. Example of deductive reasoning: all men are mortal. Kofi is a man, therefore Kofi is mortal. So logical laws. We're going to see logical laws as we progress. Of course, next class we will begin with our logic topics. Then we have mathematical laws, which are rules for mathematical operations. Examples: never divide by zero. That's a mathematical law. And then all the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and others in mathematics. Now, those are mathematical laws. Then we have divine laws. Now, divine laws are laws credited with a supernatural source. Examples will depend on the religion in question. So, for example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, forgiving those who offend us, and so on. So, those are examples of divine laws. Now, this marks the end of the first half of our semester, which we dedicated to discussing certain language concepts that are relevant to logic and critical thinking. So, in our next class, we'll begin discussing arguments, beginning with deductive arguments. Now, I'm going to allow for some questions. So, I'll attend to some questions before I begin to upload this recording so that those who came late or did not come at all can begin to watch. And of course, some of you who would like to watch it again, I expect that each of you would watch the video or the recording of your classes, well, at least 2 or 3 times before your examinations. So are there any questions so that we can attend to them before we begin our uploading? If you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand and then yeah, Mukta, can you unmute your microphone so that your question can be heard? Mukta.
Okay, yeah, okay. So say, like, someone sent me a message in our group saying she's still in the lobby and she wants to join.
Yeah, let me see. Okay, is there anyone in the lobby? Let me see. Now, when was the message sent? Is it a few minutes ago, or
It
was it
was sent. No, it was sent around. Is it 7?
around 7?
7:02. Yeah, she sent me 7:02.
Let me see. Is there anyone in the lobby? That should not be possible because when I went to the meeting options, I allowed everyone to bypass the lobby. So I'm looking at my meeting options. Who can bypass the lobby? And the answer is everyone. So no one should really be in the lobby unless the person got into the lobby at the beginning of the class before I allowed everyone to pass through the lobby. And there is also a lobby section. There's a place where I see people in the lobby. I'm looking at it, but it's not showing. So, well, tell the person that she would have to watch the recording of our
Okay, sir.
session. And then Sapong, can you ask your question? Your mic is already
Yes.
on.
Sir, please, I am in now. I was the one.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. So now I'm going to do
you.
the upload. I'll do the uploading right away. Well, we are not always blessed with good internet. So now I think the uploading is working. So I would upload yours right away so that you could get your recording in your different platforms, both Sakai and WhatsApp. So I'll proceed now to stop the recording. I'm stopping it. And